Hello everyone! Today I'm going to talk about my new piece, 7 Miniatures for Piano, that I've written this year. It was the Corona COVID-19 year, 2021. The piece is composed in a 12-tone Dodecaphonic technique, and all of its 7 miniatures are composed with a single 12-tone row, the one that you can see here. In this video, I'm not going to discuss the foundations or the fundamental rules of the Dodecaphonic technique, but instead I will explain the different approaches I used in order to expand my possibilities as a composer and to create music that doesn't sound like the 12-tone row itself over and over and over again. So, if you're familiar with the core elements of this technique, I'm pretty sure that you will find this video helpful and practical. Dodecaphonic music is pretty overwhelming in terms of harmonical density and the complexity of the melodical contrapunctal possibilities. And that's why I decided to create the music in small miniature doses and to stick to traditional forms, gestures and styles. So the first one is dedicated to Schönberg, the second one is dedicated to Mussorgsky, followed by Debussy, Schumann, Berg, Gershwin, and the last one is dedicated to Rachmaninov. Before we listen to the music and dive into the different miniatures, I wanted to say a few things about the row. So this is a symmetrical row. It means that the first half of it and the second half of it are crab inversions of each other. The symmetrical row is many times associated with the work of Anton Webern, who was exploring different approaches to create unique 12-tone rows. There are a few special qualities for symmetrical rows. That could be good or bad, depends on the context. I find the symmetrical row has a very organic sound, because the intervals that appear in the first half of the row appears again in the second half of the row, as you can see here. Because the relations between the notes are appearing twice and not only once, as in a non-symmetrical row, it gives the whole piece a very clear DNA general sound that unifies everything. So, without further ado, let's listen to the first miniature, named over and dedicated to Arnold Schönberg. This is the first miniature of the cycle, but was also the first one to be composed. When you're thinking about the dodecaphonic method, this miniature is written in a very straightforward way. It's written consistently with one tone row for each hand and plays with the contrapunctal possibilities between those two rows. I decided to dedicate this first miniature to Arnold Schönberg. First of all, because he's the creator of the Dodecaphonic technique. But secondly, because, like many works by Schönberg, such as the Piano Suite, the music is referring to the music of Johann Sebastian Bach, and especially to the dances in his suites. So it's making an abstraction in a dodecaphonic manner of Bach's music, but keeping the same form, gestures, style and rhythmical feel. Well, let's listen to the second miniature. So the second miniature is dedicated to modest Mussorgsky, and of course it's referring to one of his most famous works, Pictures in Exhibition, and if to be specific, to the movement of the market at Limoges with the staccatissimo texture and the gay character. Technically, in this miniature, I was trying a different approach in order to have a different sound or different possibilities as a composer. And I was doing so by grouping the notes inside the row into chords. And when I have the chords, I can invert them as I wanted to in order to create melodies in the soprano or the bass or in the inner voices. For example, you can see here that the soprano is an ascending chromatic line going from the third note of the row to the fourth note of the row to the ninth and to the 10th note of the row. Without grouping the notes into chords this way, this ascending chromatic line would never be possible. That was one example, but this miniature is full of melodies of this kind. So let's move on to the third miniature dedicated to Debussy. This miniature was written with Debussy in mind from beginning to end, and perhaps the clearest reference to him is the time sense. In this miniature I was trying a different technique to compose with the Dodecaphonic method, and it was to read the row from two different points, from the first note and also from the middle note onwards to the end. This way I could compose with intervals that doesn't naturally exist in my row. For example, the perfect fifth that opened this miniature doesn't appear anywhere in my tone row. When I listen to the whole piece now, with some perspective, I feel like maybe this kind of use of the row is so different that it almost makes this miniature an outsider in the whole cycle. I think it's mostly because when you're using the row this way, you're creating intervals that doesn't naturally exist there, and it kind of defies the DNA rule of the row and gives it such a different sound. So, the next miniature is named over Robert Schumann. Let's listen to it and then talk about it. For me, this miniature is a clear reference to Schumann's Kinderszenen. When composing this miniature, I was mostly concerned with the melodic lines, the romantic gestures, and the bell-shaped form that goes into a traditional climax and then fades out into nothing. Technically, in this miniature, I was creating new possibilities by composing with one-tone row for both of the hands. This type of writing allowed me to spread the tones of the row among many octaves and to achieve a more delicate harmonical language. Another special characteristic of my row is being presented very clearly in this miniature. If you look closely, you will see 4 different hidden triadic chords within the row. In the first half, there are 2 tritone apart major chords, and in the second half of the row, there are 2 tritone apart minor chords. In this miniature, I was trying to put this bitonalism in the front. And as you can see in the first bar, the melody is the simple F-sharp descending major chord. Alright, let's move on to the 5th miniature dedicated to Alban Berg. This miniature is the most dramatic, emotionally intense, and also the darkest point of the whole cycle. I decided to dedicate it to Berg because I find him the most romantic composer among our 3 dodecaphonic masters. Dodecaphonic-wise, in this miniature, I was using 2 different rows that doesn't really belong to any of the hands. I mean that if you follow them, you will see that they pass freely from one hand to each other. This kind of use of the rows opens up so many new possibilities that it really makes you think about your working patterns and forces you to rearrange the way you look at the row and how you treat it. Alright, so let's listen to the 6th miniature named over Gershwin. This is of course the most jazzy miniature. I found it jazzy rhythmically, harmonically, and also in the form of it. I remember that from the very first bars I was thinking about Gershwin and trying to follow his spirit in the abstractic way of the Dodecaphonic technique. The form of this miniature is a general ABA form with an intro and coda. A part is very groovy and loud, and the B part is pretty lyric and quiet, just like in many jazz standards. Harmonically, this miniature is built upon a pedal point. This slow C that you can see here, that repeats over and over and over again, gives the entire miniature its harmonical structure. The ostinato, or the loop in the bass, is literally the row that I just spread over the bar and accented by placing some of the notes down an octave on downbeats. In a way, this is a much simpler use of the row relatively to other miniatures. As you can see, the left-hand part is simply the row repeating over and over again, gliding and moving through the different transpositions. So, let's listen to the last miniature, dedicated to Rachmaninov. In many ways, like Rachmaninov's music, this miniature is probably the hardest one to analyze, but one of the easiest one to listen to. Anyway, in my opinion. Technically, in this miniature, I wasn't trying any particular new technique, but rather just combining all the different approaches I was using throughout the entire piece and combining them together. Frankly, I don't think I can perform this miniature. I think it requires a much better pianist than I am right now. Having said that, I think now it's the right time to talk about the performance we've just heard. Surprisingly, I think you will find out that this is an entirely a digital performance that I've created on my computer. I think there were two main factors that helped me to achieve this human feel to a digital performance. The first one was to edit the velocity of each and every MIDI signal, and the second one was to edit the tempo, the BPM of the piece pretty excessively. I think both of them really helped me to achieve this kind of human touch and also flexible human time sense. Lastly, I want to thank Dean Segev that helped me mixing and mastering the music. In the video's description you can find the links for the music in all available platforms. And please leave me a comment and let me know what you think. And until next time, ciao!